The Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Planted with Sara Pion. I'm Sara Pion, your host, and today I have Madison Margolin on the show. She's a journalist covering psychedelics and spirituality, and she is the author of Exile Ecstasy, Growing Up with Ram Dass and the Coming of Age in the Jewish Psychedelic Underground. She's also the host of the Be Here Now Network's Set and Setting podcast, as well as the co-founder of both Double Blind Magazine and the Jewish Psychedelic Summit. She's written for publications like Rolling Stone, Playboy, Vice, High Times, Lucid News, and the Jewish publishing house and production studio Iron Press. Did I say that right, Madison? Okay. I'm really excited to have you here today. And even though we are recording ahead of time, the day we are recording is the release of your book. And I'm really excited for you. Thank you so much for joining me today. And I'm really looking forward to our conversations.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I always ask my guests, even though we're talking about psychedelics today, I mean, there are definitely psychotropic attributes to cannabis, but what was your first cannabis experience?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of grew up with cannabis in the household. My first experience with cannabis wasn't really like my own experience, but just, it always would remind me of like my dad. My dad would always smell like weed because he smokes weed all the time. So, my experience of cannabis was just having it around the house, or having the smell of it around the house, rather. But yeah, I smoked weed for the first time when I was in high school. A guy I was dating, just like let me try some of his joint, and I didn't really get high the first time I smoked, and I wasn't really like that into it, and I got a little bit more into weed when I was 18 in college, and yeah, I had a moment where I was like smoking, with friends a lot, but at this point in my life, I don't smoke that often. I mean, I guess if someone offers me a spliff, I definitely will take a little bit, but yeah.
Well, yeah. For those who don't know this, Madison's father is noted cannabis attorney Bruce Margolin. And so a question I have for you, because I also work in policy, and one of the things that we talk about is the normalization of cannabis and how if you have it around you all the time and it's normalized, there isn't so much of a draw or a curiosity about it because the taboo is kind of out of the way. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't like itching to try it. I knew I would try it eventually. It's funny because my dad, being a lawyer, it was very like by the rules. And, when I was 18, I got a medical marijuana card because that was the legal way that I could smoke. And when I smoked weed when I was 16, with this kind of guy I had dated, my stepmom was like pretty upset. She's like, "You're not supposed to be doing this, and you're doing it on the front lawn." And, it was kind of funny because my parents are such stoners. But yeah, I do think that like it's not taboo, and I think, adults have an opportunity to normalize healthy cannabis use, if that's their practice. And, it's like drinking a glass of wine. It's the same kind of thing that grown-ups do, and kids just see it.
Right, right. So getting past that, because today we're not going to have a conversation about cannabis. Today we're going to talk about your book. How did you decide to write the book? And then let's get into some more about, I started reading it this weekend, and I have to say it was very interesting, and it was seeing a different side of psychedelics, especially, we talk about spirituality and psychedelics, but how many conversations do we actually have about spiritual Judaism and psychedelics? So let's get into that.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really like decide to write a book. I mean, I always felt like I had a book in me, and based on the way that I grew up and my upbringing and the experiences I had, I just knew that I was going to be channeled into a piece of writing. I've always kept a journal. And as a journalist, I've also like drawn from my experiences and interviews and reporting toward what I put out there. And so it wasn't like, okay, now I'm writing a book, that's my decision. It was more just like developing and evolving throughout, my whole life, and especially the past 10 years, until kind of a book agent fell into my lap, who I met through publicist Zoe Wilder. And I told him that I have this shtick on psychedelics and Judaism and Ram Dass, and he helped me get the book proposal together and pitched it out. And then it was like, okay, go, you're writing a book now. But I had it in me the whole time.
Zoe's wonderful. She's one of those people that draws out the creativity with people. I
Yeah.
adore her. So you also founded Double Blind magazine as well. Would you like to tell our listeners a little bit about that too?
Yeah, so I co-founded Double Blind. I started it with a former st a classmate from Columbia Journalism School, and she and I had both been covering psychedelics and cannabis. And so the idea came to her when she was meditating, and she called me right after and said, "Hey, do you want to start a psychedelic magazine?" And this was 2018, and psychedelic or cannabis was kind of like big in media, and psychedelics were kind of just trailing right behind. And I said yes. And it kind of just took off from there. And, I'd always say that we're using psychedelics as a jumping off point to talk about so many other topics, right? Spirituality, mental health, science, policy, environmentalism, sexuality, recreation, culture, whatever it is. Psychedelics really touch all sectors of society.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I've noticed with being in cannabis for over a decade is that a lot of people are moving from cannabis to the psychedelics conversation, or they've been immersed in both. I think one thing that's really important to impress upon people is, and I say this with somebody I appreciate psychedelics very much myself. I've used them throughout my life in different ways, mostly spiritual. But, there are some things to take into consideration. Set and setting, just like you've talked about, is a very important thing. But one thing to be careful about is that with cannabis is basically behaves as an adaptogen, and it's the harm that can come from it is minimal to none. When we're looking at psychedelics, some people who have come from cannabis into psychedelics are looking at it as their next foray into their fortunes. But we really need to be careful with the way that we handle it, because the implications are much different. And that's not to say that it shouldn't be available and we shouldn't be having the conversations. We absolutely should. But as you had mentioned in your book too, that it doesn't necessarily cause the problems, but it could actually add to what people already have packed in their luggage. Maybe would you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, just so I understand the question, like how cannabis or psychedelics could kind of dig up what's underneath the surface for somebody.
Yeah, and especially with psychedelics, especially like one of the things that I think we need to have more conversations about is, if somebody is already on SSRIs and using psychedelics, for some people could actually create some continued change in their mentation. And so we really want to be mindful with our psychedelics use and know, like, if we're taking any other brain medications, that there could be some implications. So we want to keep ourselves safe and not have that moment, so that we create prohibition so we can actually approach this in a very thoughtful, holistic way.
Yeah, I mean, if you have any sort of contraindicated psychiatric conditions like schizophrenia, for instance, borderline personality, bipolar, but mainly especially schizophrenia, you do want to exercise caution, because psychedelics and even cannabis can sort of trigger what's going on already.
Mm-hmm.
It really is like a magnifying glass for, our mental health state. And so much of it is the set and setting, right? Like if we're feeling safe, that can drastically alter a trip, versus like if we don't feel safe, or if we start fighting the experience, the fighting of it, not surrendering to the medicine itself, can actually be very like psychologically dangerous, cause like kind of this like splitting effect, which again, why it's so kind of specific for schizophrenics. Um, but yeah, I mean, I wish that more people knew all of this, because as it's becoming more popular, as it's becoming a bigger conversation in mainstream media, I wish that psychedelic harm reduction and best practices around set and setting um, were as big a part of the conversation as just the excitement overall of it, because that's what's really going to like take us into a safer future with psychedelic post-prohibition.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like when the media and our larger population get into everything, they just kind of throw everything out and they're like, it's wonderful, let's do it. Like, everybody should do it. Give it to your grandma. And it's kind of like, well, yes, and
Yeah, exactly.
let's have that conversation. And I'm really excited to see how things are coming along. It's a lot different than it was just a few years ago. For you, like with the book, you had a very interesting childhood, and you got to spend time with a lot of people that people revere, that you saw as family members, and just regular people that came to hang out at your house. How did that shape a lot of your view of just the world in general?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't like think that, originally when I was a kid, I was like embarrassed by my parents and their friends.
Aren't we
And
all?
yeah, and they had such antics, and you'd walk into our house and it smells like weed or incense, and there's like pictures of this guru around, and like he kind of looks like my dad, so it makes it look like my dad is just like massive photos of himself all over the place, and it's just I was really shy about it. And as far as, Ram Dass being a family friend, Be Here Now was really central to just, it was like a book that was around the house. It was a phrase that was used. It was just this, like just taken for granted as like part of my childhood and upbringing. And I didn't really appreciate it and maybe even resented it because, my parents were kind of exposing me to all these things that a lot of people come to on their own spiritual journeys. And when it comes from the people that you naturally would rebel against for, other reasons like family trauma and, just the way that families hurt each other, it was hard for me to like really, take all of it in just wholeheartedly. So I really, initially I pushed it away and then realized after the fact, like, oh, like this is actually worthwhile stuff. Like my parents aren't just crazy. I mean, they are, and also, are interested in cool things. And so it was really about like coming back to it on my own terms and like through my own self-discovery. Um, but come also having like this sort of behind the scenes perspective on all of these characters and like what it looks like to grow up in a place where everyone is already integrating their psychedelic experiences through spiritual modality and also seeing like the limitations of that as well and the way that people, treat each other, conduct their lives.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's really interesting to think about, people that we revere and forgetting that they're human beings that bleed and live. And I know for me, Ram Dass was an integral part of getting in tune with myself when I was in high school. He was my first foray into meditation and really creating that quiet within myself. But because I didn't know him, there's this feeling of, making him not necessarily a man. And it's like as you get older, and especially like I live in the Bay, so meeting a lot of people and you're like, oh, human beings doing what they do. Some are crazy in amazing, interesting ways and are doing wonderful things, but they're human. And I think that that's such a gift that you get to see that side of it. I know for me, having a well-known musician for a husband, I got to kind of get a glimpse of that from time to time. And I'm like, well, when we're home, we're hanging out in our jammies and watching Netflix. I mean, life continues. With the book, though, like, let's get into that because we could talk about everything around it, but I'm really interested in like getting more into just some of the points that you'd like our listeners to hear before delving into the book, because I think it's a really great one, especially because it does talk about a lot of your process into getting into the work that you do and just, how it shaped your life. What are some things that you would like them to have as takeaways when they go through this book?
Yeah, I mean, the book covers, it really uses myself. I use myself as a character to explore, these ideas of do psychedelics even work as healing medicines, quote unquote, or what's the point of spirituality, or like is Be Here Now a realistic mandate of mindfulness? And if you can accomplish being here now, so what? And what's the point? And, I really like, you know, approach some of these things that everyone loves to like drink the Kool-Aid with, with some like skepticism. And again, that's based on like being overly exposed to it and also having, just like having regular life happen and family and divorce and, all the stuff that makes a childhood challenging. So I mean, first of all, the book is not, like I said, it's my own personal story, which has a Jewish valence to it, but it's not only for Jews, it's for really anybody who's looking to, accept where they come from and what their lineage is and look into their own sort of ancestral roots for spiritual wisdom and ritual. It's for anyone who's maybe connected with Ram Dass and wants to see like how Be Here Now plays out in actual life. Um, it's obviously also for Jews who are looking to deepen or better understand their own spiritual and psychedelic journeys and experiences. It's for people in the psychedelic space who want to see how that can be, how psychedelic experience and consciousness can be blended or understood in the framework of spirituality and religion and mindfulness, like Be Here Now. It's for people who like to read memoirs and coming of age stories. Yeah,
I love that. It's I love that you point out the fact that it's not just for somebody who would be interested in Judaism. As somebody, my mother is Finnish and my father is from Iran, so I grew up in a Lutheran Muslim family, a non-practicing Muslim, but I didn't have a pork chop till I was 30. So I didn't. But, we always had questions about religion and why we were raised Christian in the United States. And my father, is Shia, but he never practiced. And he always said to me, God is what is in your heart. That's all that matters. It's be a good person. And he would talk about, the three pillars of religion, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam as, the books of Abraham. And he, was just kind of like, he said, God is everywhere. It's what's in your heart that counts. And so as I got older and I would see a lot of the strife around religion, it was something that was really hard for me to get my head around, because I was always raised to believe that religion is something that you culturally relate to, and so that you're brought up to care about others and have a good foundation, a good spiritual foundation, and it wasn't something that created differences and fighting. And though that is a very naive perspective, in many ways I was really grateful to be raised with that appreciation, because one of my favorite books is actually gosh, I can't remember his name now. I've got it tucked away. But it was written by this rabbi called God is a Verb. And I remember, pardon me?
Is it Jay Michelson?
No, it wasn't. It was I know it was, his first name was David, but I can't remember his last name. I'll have to send it to you. It was really wonderful. I remember just dropping into a bookstore on my lunch break when I worked in downtown San Francisco, and he was doing a reading, and I was just captivated by what he was saying. And I think that, especially in this day and age with everything that's going on, we could learn so much more from one another around our spiritual values, rather than some of the people in the world that are looking to bastardize religion to control people and create greater strife.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really, psychedelics taught me a lot about universalism, which is that we all have a capacity for mysticism and for connecting to God. And it, ultimately, when you look inside the major religions of the world, or even the less major religions of the world, it's like different languages to express some of the same concepts.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's where you were at that time, where you got the message.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So how are you feeling about the release today? What are the emotions that are coming up for you? It's got to be exciting.
Yeah, it is really exciting. It's weird because, I worked so, this has like been so long in the making, and it's just also the overwhelm of like, this time last year I was like tucked away writing the first draft, like on a deadline, not, like not talking to anybody, really just like in a zone. And now here I am, and it's out, and it's just like life is so much. it's hard to like grasp that it's like out there in the world and it's really vulnerable. And it's also a really weird time to be releasing a book and promoting a book. Just there's so much else that's important and in the going on in the world and in the news. And I feel a little bit weird promoting the book, honestly. But yeah, I guess it'll become real sooner or later.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. It's like it is a strange time to be doing, but also when you look at it, it's also a really good time to be putting out some truth and beauty into the world and having greater conversations. I mean, it's you can, I think, especially as a creator and as a creative person, it's like we tend to kind of downplay the things that we're putting out in the world because we know who we are and other people have other perceptions. But I also think that as a creative, it's important in these times of strife to be putting forth, books and other creations for the world to not to distract, but to actually to deepen their thoughts and hearts and minds. And it's because if we don't have these things, we have more strife. We have more. There's a lot of ugliness in the world right now, and we have to have beauty and truth and conversations to help sustain us and to have better conversations, and also I think to inspire generations that are younger than us to look more to truth and beauty and love rather than strife. And when I see, it's been heartbreaking what's been going on in the Middle East. Sometimes people ask me as a Middle Eastern woman, like, what my thoughts are. And my thoughts are that everybody deserves a home and everyone deserves to be safe and seen and heard. And so there's no right answer.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I was like in Israel writing the book last year, and I just came back in the middle of October after the war broke out. And so, there's so much emotional, it's a very emotional moment. I was doing also reporting in Ramallah and talking to Israelis and Palestinians both who are involved in kind of coexistence, like psychedelic circles together and stuff like that. But I think really the task at hand is, in promoting this book or even looking just at the ideas that are contained within it, is that, like what how can we take like a trauma-informed lens and apply that to the way that we talk about and think about and act out, what the conflict that's happening. And the other part of it is like expanding our consciousness to be able to hold multiple truths at once and say like, this is true for me or for this group of people, and this is what's true for the neighbors here. Who don't have to be our enemies. And so, being able, like, it's not like one or the other, but expanding the consciousness for it to be seen in a totally different light that I think gets obscured by like the binaries and the right versus left and the religious versus secular and the Israeli versus Palestinian, whatever it is in the news that I just don't think is accurate or fair to put it in those terms.
Yeah. The othering that we're seeing is really, it's heartbreaking. I actually, like, I have stayed off social media because of it. It's just, these are human beings.
Yeah.
That have families, that love, that live, and they should be able to do it safely on all sides. And I don't understand. I guess, for some of us, it's really hard to be able to see that in such an inclusive way. It's like there's a lot of, and there's a lot of baked in trauma that people are responding to too, instead of just the facts. But I mean, we see this also in our country here. It's in the past, 6 years now. It just, as we were talking before, it's not about religion being bad, but it's about people, perhaps utilizing it in a way to manipulate people, like what we're seeing with the evangelical Christians here. It's like, I'm like, oh, wow, that kind of reminds me of the revolution back when my father was sitting in front of the television worried about his family. It's just like, I just wish that we could have greater conversations about people being more discerning with who they're seeing as their leaders, and really having more critical thought about the fact that just because you have different beliefs doesn't mean that the other person is more or less worthy. It's just about showing up and being a good person in the world and being a citizen of the world, and deepening, your love and your spirituality. Like, really, like, be here now. We are part of the same collective consciousness, and our contributions are all equally, as valuable.
Yeah, I mean, it's, there's scientists are studying the quote unquote mystical experience that's occasioned by psychedelics or, in particular psilocybin, but
Mm-hmm.
they've identified these criteria for mysticism, and one of them is a sense of oneness. And I think that's so vital, like when we talk about psychedelic consciousness or the ethos of psychedelics, not just taking them, but like applying like the lessons that they expose us to, is this concept of oneness where like like me and the people around me are, there's like this internal kind of soul and divinity that's shared by everybody. And, sounds like really hippie kind of spiritual terms, but is, a huge, like a promising factor in creating empathy and, coexistence.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. A few years ago, I was speaking at the Women's Visionary Congress, and there was a healer from South America, and she came to speak, and she was a great teacher. And one of the things that she talked about was people coming to South America for ayahuasca or other rituals, or taking plants back to the States, and that, really, like, as a shaman, she was saying, you need to give back. You can't just take. And there were some very healing moments, especially with some of our elders in the community, where they had some very deep conversations about that. And I think that that's also part of this, the spiritual aspect of psychedelics is, if you're receiving, how much are you giving?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing is it's like people go on these psychedelic journeys or, are on perpetual healing journey or whatever it is. And it, part of it is not just about like how much can I heal myself for the sake of myself, but like how much am I using that bettering of myself to then be more of service to people around me.
Yeah. Yeah. What are some things that you've seen that have really inspired you around that?
I'd say the Rainbow Gathering, which is sort of a precursor to Burning Man. It's a free gathering in a different national forest every year around 4th of July. And you could go there for a couple days or a week or a month or whatever. It's a gathering. It's not officially a festival, but when you're there, it's a completely different paradigm. There's no money, there's no, the culture is just it's sort of like psychedelic ethos put into practice to create this temporary little utopia in the woods. And it showed me by going to Rainbow a handful of times, what it would look like if society actually incorporated psychedelic ideals. And that's not to say there's not politics and drama at Rainbow too. There always is, no matter what.
You've got
But
humans involved, right?
yeah, just a complete, going there is a psychedelic experience in and of itself, just because you're in a totally different world and, that feels psychedelic.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like the Rainbow Gatherings in some ways have retained more of their integrity than, say, Burning Man. Because I remember back in the day, Burning Man was just a crazy, crazy festival of artists doing nutty things, and now it seems much more transactional. Like, I hear about people saying, "Oh, how much business gets done on the planet?" I'm like, that makes me sad.
Yeah, it's its own, it used to be off the grid and now the playa is its own grid. And also the cost of getting there, even though there's no money once you get to Burning Man, it's like, okay, well, it costs like, the ticket and then the cost of supplies and then getting there from all over the world and then these fancy camps. And like there's just so much classism at Burning Man. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the Black Rock Hilton to come in.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you see what are some emerging groups in psychedelics and gatherings that you've been seeing that have been you've been heartened by, that you've been connecting with, that you enjoy?
Yeah, I mean, I co-founded this Jewish Psychedelic Summit with Rabbi Zach Kamenetz, who's actually in Berkeley, and Natalie Ginsburg, who's been working for MAPS for several years. And it's just been really heartening to see the community, the Jewish community at large, kind of come together and acknowledging psychedelic practices and ethos of the religion and ways of observing it. And again, it's psychedelic Judaism is nothing new. Like JPS, Jewish Psychedelic Summit, is a couple years old, but it's really like just articulating what's been happening for decades, if not, thousands of years. And then I've seen other religious groups, like there was a Mormon psychedelic summit, which I thought was really cool. And there's a group called Faith Indelics where, again, I'm really just interested in how people are framing their psychedelic experiences and integration through religious frameworks. And then, beyond that, I think, yeah, I mean, I don't know, there's so many different psychedelic communities at this point that it's hard to pinpoint, just one. But um, I guess what I'll say is that I'm really pro honoring the elders in psychedelic space. And there's a lot of people who put their reputations and freedoms on the line to just keep the movement alive and to deal acid or make acid or whatever it is. And even though now it's the industry is becoming way more palatable to investors and pharmaceutical companies and researchers and whatever, I also, and the same with cannabis, is just really want to honor the people who were out there representing before it was cool, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was in New York this spring for a conference, and it was funny because somebody was like, "Hey, you want a mushroom chocolate?" And I was like, I live in the Bay, so I've gone to many parties where I've been offered mushroom chocolates, but it was like it felt like the first time I had a dispensary product, because they pulled out this beautifully wrapped bar and like snapped off a piece for me, and I was like, whole new world. I mean, if you had told me 7 years ago this was going to happen, I would have been like, I don't know. I give it 10 more years. Like it's been happening at a rapid pace, which is really fascinating. And just even hearing about people with their, experiences. Like I'm used to people doing, like, I always call it mental house cleaning, a heroic dose. You really, like, you have a moment, you process, you like take time to do it. And now people are microdosing and talking about like how it's changing their quality of life and creativity. And it gives me hope that it can usher in a more thoughtful, compassionate version of our world.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think I really believe in it and I think it's possible. And that's why I do this work. But, I think it takes integration more than it takes people even doing psychedelics, is really living by the ideas that they expose us to. And that's really challenging because sometimes it requires us to do a lot of work on ourselves first to sort of mediate this relationship between individual and collective healing so that we can, rather than making psychedelics something that neatly fits into like our really screwed up paradigms of economics and the mental health care system and whatever, like actually use psychedelic thinking to like get us out of the mess that's making us sick to begin with.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because we have a lot of tired tropes that, there is definitely, there are a small amount of people that it's in their best interest that the rest of the collective consciousness stay unhealthy and unbalanced. And having that thoughtfulness and creating those, how would you say it? Just, well, I guess it just goes back to set and setting, like creating those opportunities to look within and take back into the world when we're done with our experiences. The goodness that we've gleaned from that is a huge part of making the world a better place to live.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that again, it's like all in the integration, I say. The
Yeah.
integration.
So for people who read the book and feel inspired, what are some rules of thumb that you would say for somebody who's interested in dipping their toe into the psychedelic mystical sphere or pond?
Yeah, I would say obviously set and setting is so important. Like set meaning your internal state, like emotional, spiritual, mental, state going into a psychedelic experience, and then your setting being the surrounding factors. Um, where you are, who you're with, time of day, where in the calendar it's taking place. And going beyond that, I kind of have like I won't call it a methodology, but you talk about like spiritual pond or whatever. And it's that I often look to spirituality or to religion or ritual as informing the set and setting. So, and again, you don't have to do this with Judaism, you can do it with kind of anything, but like whether, but what I do is like look at where we are in the calendar, in the Hebrew lunar calendar, whether it's Shabbat or specific holiday, and like how am I bringing the themes of that holiday into my own personal intention, and like how are like the sort of spiritual energies of the season or the month influencing what's on my mind and my own personal set. So allowing the external factors to be my set, and then also like looking at the setting as, am I, you know in a holiday environment where all of the fixings of the particular holiday or Shabbat are kind of creating the physical vessel for my psychedelic experience. And again, you can do that with any kind of religious practice, and it doesn't have to be tied to a particular religion either. But I do think there's really valuable tools, or there's value in taking the physical, incorporating it into your psychedelic experience so that you also have it afterward during the integration, whether it's having particular essential oils that you smell during that, like can then afterward trigger your memory of that, physical, mental, spiritual state, especially smell is very connected to memory. um, Doing particular yoga poses or dancing or whatever, and then having that afterward again to remind your body of the psychedelic state. Music, obviously, playlists are a huge one. Again, like if it's tied to a holiday, the holiday might might remind you of that. Or for me, it's Shabbat, which happens every week. Um, yeah, there's all different sorts of practices that you can incorporate. And again, using props is huge.
And when a person is coming back into the world after their experience, what are some things that you would suggest so that they can maintain some of their learnings?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really valuable to journal. Whether you're journaling right after you finish the experience, or even, I mean, I don't like it. I don't recommend that people use their phones while they're under the influence, but whether you want to like record a voice memo somehow, or maybe you're with somebody who wants to record for you so you don't have to like deal with the phone, or or they can write down your musings, right? But like in that period after you peak and you're starting to come down is so vital and important for the integration itself, because you're lucid enough where you can start to articulate and process, but you're still also in that space. And, to be able to read what was coming up and what was on your mind is just huge. And again, maybe it's a good opportunity if you're creative to draw something or to play music or try to, and again, stuff that you can really take with you from that period and return to it after.
Yeah, I think it's really wise that you said to kind of stay away from the digital during that time. It's like I'm old school. I love notebooks and journals anyway. Like I use my phone and do my graphics and everything on the computer, but I find that the most organic, heartfelt stuff comes from, pen and paper or whatever medium I'm using that isn't digital. I think it's a really important thing. I mean, the digital world has its importance, but I think that its place isn't necessarily when you're processing your trip.
Right. Exactly. I mean, I don't want to touch my phone if I'm tripping.
Yeah, it's kind of like looking in a mirror when you're tripping.
Yeah.
Well, Madison, I'm so glad you came on the show today. I'm really excited to see what people glean from your book. You have a lot of really interesting stories and a lot of things to share. For our listeners out there, please also, check out the book, check out Double Blind, check out Madison's podcast. And if people want to follow you on social media or see what you're doing, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, it's at Madison Margolin on Instagram or Margolin Madison on X, Twitter, whatever it's called these days. And my name, just Madison Margolin on Facebook. And you could also just go to my website, which is madisonmargolin.com. It's MADISON MARGOLIN.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to our future conversations. And I know you're going to do you're already doing a lot of awesome stuff, but I can't wait to see what you do next.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And everyone, remember, if you like listening, please give us a review, share it with a friend. Let us know what your favorite episodes are. And if you'd like to stay in touch over social media, we are Planted with Sara Pion on Facebook and Planted with Sara on Instagram and Twitter. You can also go to our website, www.plantedwithsara.com, or listen to us on our parent network, Radio Misfits Network, where there are other great podcasts, like one of my favorites, the Winemakers Podcast. So check it out. You can listen to Planted wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, whether that's Pandora, Spotify, Amazon, Google, Apple, Stitcher, TuneIn, we are there. So join us, and until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, it's a wild world out there. Be good to one another. Until next time, take care.